Chapter 2 of Dr. John Dee, Elizabethan Mystic and Astrologer by G.M. Hort. This Librivox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2. There is no actual warrant for the very general belief that Dee took at Louvain the doctor's degree which had not been conferred on him at Cambridge. The chances are that the title doctor, so inseparable from his name in after life, and in the popular idea of him, was merely bestowed in its original complimentary sense, when it had become evident that he was verily and indeed doctus, or learned. As doctor he was doubtless known at the court of Edward VI. Towards the close of the year 1551, Sir John Cheek introduced him to Secretary Cecil, and accepted on behalf of his royal pupil 2 manuscript treatises on astronomical subjects, which Dee, already an industrious writer, had dedicated to the young king. A yearly pension of 100 crowns was now granted him by Edward. This was exchanged, not very profitably, as it afterward appeared, for the lay rectorship of Upton-on-Severn, in Worcestershire, and Long Ladenham, in Lincolnshire. Soon after we hear of Dee's refusing the offer of a lectureship in mathematical science at the University of Oxford. He was seemingly content with his income from the aforesaid rectorships, and with the patronage of the Duchess of Northumberland, which he enjoyed at this time, writing at her request a treatise on the cause of tides and another on the heavenly bodies. The Duchess's ill-fated husband, the father-in-law of Lady Jane Grey, is better known to the general reader as an ambitious politician than as a literary student, but he was actually a man of considerable culture, a friend of Ascham's, and for a short time Chancellor of the University of Cambridge. Dee may well have believed that, in the shadow of such powerful patrons, he would be able to live a life of learned leisure, independent of formal appointments, and devoted more and more to his favorite lines of study. What those lines were, and how increasingly he was attracted to them, was soon to appear. In 1552, Jerome Chardin, the famous physician of Padua, visited England and lodged at the house of Sir John Cheek, where Dee must frequently have seen and talked with him. Chardin was then in his prime, an occultist, surrounded by all the mysterious glamour of Padua, the supposed school of the necromantic art, with an intense belief in his own powers and a keen commanding intellect. He had been invited to prescribe for the young king, whose health gave increasing anxiety, and since astrology was then a recognized aid to medicine, he drew the horoscope of the royal boy. His report was cautious enough. He prophesied the possibility of a long life, if certain dangers from grave illnesses could be surmounted. But to Sir John Cheek, himself an astrologer, and to Sir John's learned young friend, the English scholar of Louvain, we can easily imagine that he spoke more freely, both on this and on kindred matters. Dee was considerably Chardin's junior, and may well have looked up to him with something of a disciple's reverence, eager to learn what the Italian, on his part, would not have been unwilling to teach. The range of their discussions may be guessed when we remember the supernormal powers that Chardin claimed to possess and to exercise at will. He could, he declared, project his soul out of his body. He had a peculiar kind of clairvoyant vision. He practiced divination and dreamed prophetic dreams. Also, and this is a fact particularly significant in the light of Dee's after history, Chardin believed himself to be accompanied by a genius or guardian spirit, like the daemon of Socrates, which gave him counsel and assisted him in his undertakings. At the same time he was a bold and independent thinker, by no means credulous, nor bound by the accepted superstitions of his time. For instance, he confidently pronounced witchcraft to be a form of insanity, and in physical science and his own profession of medicine he anticipated many modern theories and methods. The whole life of this remarkable and, in his last years, unfortunate man is of unusual interest, but we are here concerned only with his influence on the gentler, less enterprising spirit of Dee, and with the stimulus and inspiration his companionship must have given to the younger man. From this time the bent of Dee's studies is no longer in doubt. Henceforth we see him committed, for good or ill, to the pursuit of occult knowledge. The troubles following on the death of Edward VI, which took place soon after Chardin's return to Italy, could not have failed to distress and disturb the peace-loving scholar. Northumberland's tragic fate must have been also a blow to him, but the new queen seems to have been kindly disposed to the son of Roland Dee, and she had sufficient culture to respect and patronize his learning. Apparently Dee was invited by the queen to draw her horoscope. At any rate, he did draw it, and in due time that of her Spaniard bridegroom also. The favor, however, of the elder sister was not destined to advance his fortunes very far. His eyes and thoughts were already turning toward the younger, and soon, with the connivance of her personal servants, the young astrologer royal entered into correspondence with the Princess Elizabeth in her semi-captivity at Woodstock. It was inevitable that he should wish to know what the stars predicted for her future, whether to the daughter of Anne Boleyn a better fate was promised than to the daughter of Catherine of Aragon. Inevitable also that Elizabeth should be eager to hear anything that could raise her hopes, or at least allay her fears. Dee drew her horoscope, then seemingly was imprudent enough to show her that of her sister, and to discuss with her the differing aspects of the planets in the two maps. Such discussions in the case of royal personages are easily suspected to be treasonable, and again we hear the ominous cry of black magic, more dangerous now, and urged with a more malignant will. There is a wild tale of children whom Dee had bewitched, and even of enchantments directed against the Queen's life. Dee's lodging in London were searched, and his papers and persons seized. All the cumbrous machinery of the law was brought against him, and even after he had been acquitted by the Star Chamber on the charge of treason, it seemed as if the popular accusation of heresy would give his enemies their will. He was very near the flames, with him in the Bishop of London's prison, sharing his room and his very bed with one Bartlett Green, a meek religious man, but a suspected heretic, and, to his inexpressible horror, Dee saw his companion in misfortune dragged forth to his terrible doom. The passionate sympathy he showed could have done his own cause little good, but it is to Mary's credit that she recognized that there was no substantial evidence against him. He had, as Disraeli phrases it, no leisure to become a heresiarch, and though he doubtless held but loosely by the faith in which he had been brought up, he could have had no violent animus against it. His learning in divinity seems even to have won the confidence of Bishop Bonner, though the story that he assisted the bishop to examine some suspected heretics is now generally discredited. When set at liberty again, Dee occupied himself for a while with projects for founding a state national library, and he drew up and presented to the Queen a supplication for the recovery and presentation of ancient writers and monuments. His own library was by this time considerable. So too, in spite of, or perhaps because of, his late misfortunes, was his reputation as an astrologer and a sage. The rest of Mary's troubled reign passed for him peacefully enough. He lodged in London, though we do not know in what quarter, pursued his studies, and eked out the modest income that came from his rectorships by drawing horoscopes and giving astrological advice to people of all classes who came to consult him. In 1558, Queen Mary died, and her younger sister, remembering the sage whose prophecies had beguiled her dark hour, at once sent for Dee to come to court and to calculate a favorable day for her crowning. Dee named January 14, 1559, and was, from this time on, as his biographer Miss Charlotte Fell Smith expresses it, continually busied about one thing or another at the fancy of the Queen. This was not, perhaps, in itself undesirable. Dee's attachment to Elizabeth seems to have been quite sincere, and he was never unwilling then or later to come at her bidding to give his judgment on any strange circumstance which troubled her, such as the discovery in Lincoln's Inn Fields of a wax image of herself, with significant pins driven through its heart, the appearance of a great comet, and so on. But Elizabeth had much of the Tudor close-fistedness, and her astrologer's services were not substantially repaid, and he seems to have grown weary of his ambiguous position. It is also possible that the statute against sorcery, a reenactment of the former statute of Henry VIII, passed in 1562, had some influence on his desire again to leave London. Sir Walter Scott and other authorities think this act was chiefly aimed against those who falsely pretended to be magicians or victims of magic, and it was not intended to convict anyone seriously of sorcery. But a man who had been twice accused of black magic may well have felt uneasy while such legal machinery was in motion. Dee's expressed object in this new journey abroad was to take to the great printing press of Antwerp some of his more important manuscripts, among them Monas Hieroglyphica, that curious Kabbalistic treatise on the elements which, Mr. Arthur Waite has reminded us, had much to do with the later tradition of Dee as the founder of the Rosicrucian Brotherhood. The tradition, however, as Mr. Waite shows, is quite spurious, and in any case, the Monas, an unpractical mystical work which says little or nothing of the means by which alchemy was to attain its ends, cannot be said to support it. In these dissertations on the primal monad, the mortal and immortal atom, and the horizon of eternity, we are in the region of pure theory. Later writers employed the symbols used by Dee in their own utilitarian alchemical works, and Dee got the credit of the association. But the monads, useless as proof of Dee's Rosicrucianism, has a value of another kind. It serves to show that its author, however, under stress of circumstances in later life, he may have prostituted his gifts and used spiritual things for material ends, was really unworldly, a lover of wisdom for wisdom's sake, a dreamer and a thinker. The book was dedicated to the Emperor Maximilian II, and Dee presented him with a copy, which was apparently graciously accepted. On June 1564, its writer returned to England. He was kindly received by the Queen, who, as he says, deigned to become a scholar in his book, and greatly comforted and encouraged him. Preferment, however, though promised, did not come, and in the preface which Dee wrote for Henry Billingsley's Elements of Euclid, published by an English press in 1570, the disappointed scholar bitterly laments the reproach and suspicion under which he still labors. Honest students and modest Christian philosophers, he significantly says, are counted as magicians and conjurers. He that seeketh by St. Paul's advertisement in the creature's properties and wonderful virtues, to find just cause to glorify the eternal and almighty Creator, is condemned as a companion of hell-hounds and a caller and conjurer of wicked, damned spirits. This sounds preposterous language to be applied to one so high in royal favor as Dee then was. Even in those days of ferocious superstition, the violent prejudice against him and the dark construction persistently put upon all his actions seem in need of some explanation. In the preface, he infers that it is his scientific studies and experiments, so much beyond his age, that have blackened his character in the popular eye. And there is beyond doubt considerable truth in this. But as all the learned men of his time did not suffer, even among the ignorant, the same dark reproach, and as astrology and alchemy had, with some reservations, a recognized place among the sciences, we must find the explanation of Dee's peculiar unpopularity in his increasing obsession with what we now call the psychic, in the atmosphere of mystery which surrounded his attempts to develop those supernormal powers which he believed to exist in man and to be capable of lawful use. One of the faculties which he believed that he himself possessed was that of discovering hidden treasure. He offered to use this in the service of the state, and told Cecil, now Lord Burleigh, that if he were allowed to exercise his gift under the protection of the royal letter patent, he would do his utmost to discover mines of gold and silver for her Grace's only use. It is to be remembered that the ancient belief that treasure buried in the earth was in the keeping of demons, and only to be discovered by their help, still influenced the opinion of those days in regard to treasure hunting. The statutes against sorcery made the discovery of hidden treasure by the aid of magic a penal offense, punishable if persisted in by death itself. Dee's anxiety for a license from the state is therefore very explainable, and there is a certain boldness even in his cautious proposal. He practically sets aside the idea that such discoveries come under the head of magic, and will see in them nothing but the lawful putting forth, in a scientific well-trained way, of supernormal powers with which human nature itself is dowered. Elizabeth's astrologer still enjoyed the royal favor. She was gracious and friendly in all her dealings with him, and made him occasional gifts of money. But his researches, in which he now needed paid assistance, were greatly hindered by lack of funds. There is little doubt that it was his desire for knowledge, rather than avarice, which made him hanker for hidden hoards. Little or nothing seems to have come of his request, though a later grant to him of a royalty on mines may have been an indirect result of it. Fortunately for him, he had now a roof of his own. His widowed mother owned a house at Mortlake, and this she practically ceded to her son, only reserving a set of rooms in it for her own use. The Thameside village of Mortlake was then a village indeed, near enough to London to make it easy of access by the river to which the garden of Mistress Dee's house sloped down, yet remote enough for the solitude and freedom from interruption that the scholar, now past middle age and sobered by several disappointments, desired to secure. Here Dee worked ceaselessly in his library and laboratory, and received with due dignity the visits of his royal patroness, and of the great folk who sought his counsel. Here also, in 1574, he married as his first wife a young woman of whom we know nothing save that she died in the following year, and was buried in Mortlake churchyard, on the very day of one of the Queen's informal, unexpected visits. Elizabeth on this occasion refused to enter the house of mourning, but dismounted from her horse in a field nearby, in order that Dee might show her the curious properties of a convex mirror. After being a widower for 2 years, Dee married Jane Fromond, lady-in-waiting to Lady Howard of Effingham, who was to be the mother of his 8 children, and his faithful and beloved companion for many years, though she was considerably his junior. About a month before her eldest grandchild's birth, which happened on his father's 52nd birthday, Mistress Dee made over to her son, in due legal form, her house and lands at Mortlake. She continued, however, to live in the house, where in 1580 Dee records her godly end at the age of 77. These years at Mortlake were not unprosperous. Dee produced a good deal of literary work of a more practical sort, wrote a treatise on naval defense, and made some geographical researches of which Burleigh spoke highly to the Queen. Navigators employed him to draw up instructions for their course, and Elizabeth graciously received some charts and maps which he had made with wonderful skill and mathematical accuracy. These were designed to set forth the Queen's title to undiscovered countries. He was also employed in making the calculations necessary for the proposed reform of the calendar. But Dee was one of those in whom many normal tastes and outside interests may exist and flourish without weakening the bonds of the inner life or the claims of the ruling passion. It was still in darkness that he sought for light, from silence that he asked a message. In his private diary, among numerous notes of domestic and political matters, we get, ever and anon, a brief reference to things psychic, to some sign, real or supposed, that had reached him from the other world. He carefully records dreams, mysterious rappings, and the like, but these chance phenomena, which might come unasked to any man, do not satisfy his intense desire for real intercourse with the unseen, an intercourse which he hopes to establish by other means. The diary from May 25, 1581, has this significant entry. We have now to consider at great length the nature of that clairvoyant vision, and the reasons for which Dee sought to obtain it. End of chapter 2.